Hey everybody, KMO here on a hot summer afternoon in Vermont. I'm dog sitting. My friend Doug, whom you have seen in these videos, has gone to New York City for a week, and I'm staying at his house, keeping his dog company and fed and walked and all that good stuff. And today we're at the cemetery for our afternoon walk. I have been working, I can't say all that consistently or diligently on this week's comic. I mean, I had it nearly finished by the time the weekend started, and I've managed to make some progress on it. It'll be done before I go to bed tonight. No early morning Monday work for me on this one. But what to say? Yesterday's video was a bit of a bummer. I actually, I didn't delete it, but I made it unlisted, so that you couldn't really find it unless you already had the URL. But then somebody had already commented by that point asking me to not take it down, so I made it public again. It'll just linger there. But anyway, yesterday was psychologically kind of a rough day. Today's a better day. I think maybe doggy company helps with that. Oh, and cemeteries are nice. I really like cemeteries. This is a pretty good one too. It's no Greenwood Cemetery, but this ain't Brooklyn. Is there a topic? I have spent many hours over the past couple of days listening to one of the great courses via Audible. It's How Great Science Fiction Works, and it's largely a historical survey, and it's all about print science fiction. Sometimes the lecturer would make reference to movies and things, particularly to set a time period, to establish when something happened in relation to something else. But it really wasn't about movies and TV and stuff where science fiction reigns supreme. One of the themes is there was, from very early on, and largely, it was a deserved stigma. Science fiction was just considered to be trash. The paper that it was printed on was trash. The audience that it was aimed at, young men, largely from the working classes, particularly by the literary establishment, those are considered trash people. And so, as like, what's her name? Margaret Atwood. She wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which is clearly science fiction. Oryx and Crake, and The Year of the Flood and Mad Adam, that trilogy, obviously science fiction. I mean, I don't see how you could make any argument whatsoever that it isn't science fiction, except in the way that Margaret Atwood did, which is to say, well, there's no pew-pew laser guns and space battles and stuff like that. She's saying it's not skiffy, sci-fi, space opera, Flash Gordon silliness, but that's just either a misunderstanding of what science fiction is or just a deliberate propagation of, an insult directed at the readers of science fiction. But the author talks about how, that finally, after a century, that hard line between real literature and speculative fiction, or fiction that, talks about things that don't exist but might, that, those barriers are finally starting to dissolve. Although, of science fiction authors who spend a career writing really amazing science fiction, they might win, a Lifetime Achievement Award, and they might get an award that is directed at them as the author. But no science fiction novel has ever won the Pulitzer, So there's still that barrier. And he talks about how there's a continuum of readers. There are some readers they just wouldn't touch anything that they considered to be science fiction. It's absolutely, positively beneath them, and they just would not consider it. And then there are people who only want to read science fiction and who have no patience for the so-called serious literature. And I'm a college-educated man. I have been forced to read some bona fide, recognized literature. in my time, and you know, I understand it, I appreciate it, but I prefer science fiction. So I'm not an exclusive reader of science fiction, but I am a dedicated reader of science fiction. Although recently I haven't been reading much of anything, and the books that I have been taking in via audiobook have mostly been nonfiction. But the fiction books that I have taken in the past year have mostly been Iain M. Banks culture novels, you know, which is to say, new space opera. And they're amazing. Iain M. Banks, by the way, he's got kind of a funny biography as an author. He passed away, I think, in 2013, so he is the late Iain M. Banks. But he tried to write science fiction and couldn't get published. And so he thought, sort of flipping the old prejudice on its head, okay, I'll go and write some serious literature and make a name for myself that way, and then come back and write, you know, the science fiction, which is what I really want to write. And that's exactly what he did. You know, he wrote mainstream literary fiction, which is to say, as you know, paraphrasing Terence McKenna, fiction that is about the psychological minutiae of the experience of the main characters in a mundane setting. But he actually did that. He wrote several, I think, like, I don't know the exact number, many just literary fiction titles under the name Iain Banks, and then once he had established, you know, some credibility with publishers, then he returned to science fiction and he reworked, you know, a novel that he couldn't get published before he wrote those mainstream literary fiction novels, and he got it published as the first of the culture novels, Consider Phlebas. Consider Phlebas, which is a silly title, but it's a gloriously silly book. I mean, it's serious in that people die, and you know, there are themes of war and loss and sacrifice and maybe psychological commitments to things which were really bad ideas, but you know, too much blood and passion has been spilled in their service and you can't give up on them, things like that. Don't know where I'm going with all this, other than I really like some high quality science fiction, which Iain M. Banks produced a fair amount of it. It's worth checking out. Alrighty, well, the dog and I, it's time for us to head back down to the village. I will talk to you again tomorrow.